exactly when this live stream starts, Ken.
Well, we're on now.
We are on now, but were we on before? Are we on now? I know we push the button and it counts down. Like, does the countdown? Is it actually accurate? One of these days, I should. We should. I feel like I should count along with it so we can find out exactly when that live stream starts up.
At some point, you
Anyway,
just have to trust the platform, Clint. You've
is
handed
that
over control.
is that what it is? Gonna let the platform take the wheel? I see. I see.
We're all in
So,
a gradual slope towards handing over more control to the machines.
oh my
So,
goodness, isn't that the case? That is absolutely the case. Yeah. And it is another shockingly nice day here in Western New York.
oh,
As you can see, the
congratulations.
sun shines. You don't even understand how I'll take that as wonderful because it has not been the nicest of weeks, and the last weekend was quite dreary and quite dreadful.
That gets you down a little bit.
It actually did. Usually, relatively good superpower of mine. I'm pretty chipper. Usually. I mean, my family probably will disagree, but like pretty chipper usually. And Sunday, I was a little down in the old dumps. Didn't have anything to do. Couldn't go outside. It was a boring. So I wasn't thinking about ZD either.
It's important to
Anyway.
take a break.
It is. And speaking of taking a break, welcome back.
Thank
You are
you.
back. We everybody, all the chat messages are just like, "Where's Ken? We've missed Ken."
Oh
and
dear.
now you're back, which is
Well,
great.
we better start talking about something interesting then.
Oh no, no, I think that is what the people want. I'm sure. I am sure of it.
I'll do my best to bring it.
Nice. I'm gonna bring it. Speaking of which, what are we gonna talk about today? What do you think? Let's see. Here's the old
We
slide
do have a
deck.
nominated topic.
We did. We came up with this one. Oh, that's another thing. It's been a short week here. So in the United States, we had the old Labor Day,
Yes.
which I was happy to take off. Also, relatively dreary of a day here in Western New York. And then the next day, I was suddenly on PTO. It was the start of school for my family on Wednesday here in Western New York. My oldest going into high school for the first time, my daughter going into seventh grade. And we had some errands that just weren't able to get accomplished. So I've had a very short week, very low amount of preparation time for good old ZD TV. And I do like an extemporaneous ZD TV. So this one is actually something that just kind of popped into the head while I was having conversations. I know you and I have talked.
Yeah.
We've talked a bunch about how when we have because we're virtual, right? We don't rent. We
All
infrequently
remote.
we infrequently get together.
Yeah.
So you and I are on calls a lot like this, and we always turn the video on, which is nice. I started doing that like 10 years ago, back in a couple companies ago with Skype. I really like
Oh,
it.
so this was one of those conversations that you thought, why don't we just take this conversation public?
Yeah, it's exactly what it was. I was talking to our CTO, Mr. David Hart,
Oh, yeah.
and we were talking about the differences between VPN and Zero Trust.
Mhm.
So one of the reasons that we're doing ZDTV is an outreach kind of thing, right? We're trying to get the word of ZD out there to the population at large. Let them know that there is this free and open source Zero Trust overlay network, all the amazing capabilities that are packed within. And one of the things that I've not done a ton of, but a little bit of, and we have a couple people who do it, is commenting here and there on Reddit or Hacker News, or writing articles and doing that sort of stuff. So this whole VPN versus Zero Trust comes up a fair bit. There's a couple really nice and really active Reddits out there, one of which is the self-hosted Reddit, which I think is particularly well suited for
Mhm.
OpenZD.
Yeah, most
And
people are familiar with VPNs, at least as as a like a consumer VPN, or is that a good term? Do you know what I mean by a consumer
I do.
VPN? Like
NordVPN, right?
something like
Shout out
that,
to the
yeah,
sponsor.
or Proton VPN, yeah, if
Yeah.
only. Um,
Right.
Basically, I want to protect my home network traffic or my laptop traffic from my ISP. I want that shelter. I want that privacy. I want that guarantee that my activities can't be eavesdropped trivially. And so most people have this idea of a virtual private network, at least from that perspective. So, and that does provide a jumping off point for talking about zero trust.
We'll continue.
I mean, accessing the idea of zero trust, um, it is virtualizing the networking.
Yeah,
So,
and
like, if you zoom out, VPN, virtual private networking, um, in practice, a VPN isn't the same thing as a zero trust overlay, but you can access the idea of a zero trust overlay coming from that direction of a virtual private network for sure.
well, let's dive into that a little bit. Here, I'm going to just put the
This is what we're
VPN.
talking about
That's our
right
this is
now.
our current content, right? We don't have a slide to look at, so if somebody shows up, you can understand what the topic is. Yeah. So during this conversation, that ad hoc conversation, during the outreach on that home self-hosted Reddit, lots of times people will tell you, "Hey, just use a VPN," right? Like that's what VPNs are
It's
for.
so simple.
It is so simple, and there are lots of ones. I'm sure I haven't used too many of them. I mean, I think most of us, if you've worked in a corporate environment in the last 10 years,
Oh yeah.
probably have had a VPN. Probably you might like way back in the day. I had the keychain fob. Did you ever have one of those? Remember
Oh
way
yeah.
back in the day? Yeah,
Token
those.
generator, little RSA
Yeah,
ID.
exactly. Yeah. Shout out to the MFA token, 6 digits that everybody's familiar with. May not remember back when you had a little device that was basically that
Hmm.
token generator and was your particular token. Um, anyway, these VPNs, just use a VPN. Open VPN is out there. Why not use just one of these kind of things? And so it got me thinking that maybe it's worthwhile just having a conversation with you and me and anybody who's out there in the chat that wants to chat about what's the difference between open a VPN and OpenZD or a zero trust overlay, because this is not necessarily exclusive to OpenZD. This is just the kinds of things that a zero trust overlay can provide. Something going on over there? You good? I heard
Good.
the
Now
ding
there
dong.
was a ringing.
I heard the ding dong. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, anyway, it's not a zero trust overlay provides some additional features that a VPN usually
Totally.
doesn't provide. I At least I haven't seen any VPNs that purport themselves to be a zero trust overlay, but there's hot space, so who knows? There might be that sort
Yeah.
of thing happening out there. But like,
Well, you
let's
mentioned a second use case. We introduced the probably the most familiar, the most common, the most simple use case for a VPN, which is I want to shelter my private traffic from my ISP. But then you mentioned a second one, which is I want to be able to access something that I can only access on a VPN rather than accessing the whole internet. Nothing special about my destination. That was the first one. Second one, special destinations. It's private destinations, stuff that I can, as a user, like company internal stuff. That's a second use case. And
yeah.
then there's a third.
Oh, what's the third?
Well, machine to machine or private thing to private thing inside the VPN. Like if I want this server to be able to access some service on another computer, then I can wire up a virtual private network between them so that they and only they can talk to each other.
Sure. Now, I don't know about you, but I think the term VPN is relatively broad, right?
Super broad.
Would you consider ZD and OpenZD to be a VPN?
Only in the broadest sense. If you zoom way out and say, well, is it virtualizing networking? Yeah, it is. But that's
And
just not what most
is it a
people
private
mean.
network? Yeah, it
Right,
is.
but that's
But
just not what most people mean when they say VPN. They don't mean something like ZD.
no, for sure, they don't think about the granularity involved. In fact, I was going to
Right.
ask that question. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of a zero trust overlay?
I imagining it as like turning the security model upside down and starting with deny all,
Hmm.
total isolation. and bringing the right tools to make it possible to create those exceptions, to create that configuration that you need for things to talk to each other. Um, for example, if you're starting with openness, which networking starts with openness, networks deliver packets. They don't
Yeah, I love that. I don't know where we got it, but I love the quote that says that networks were designed to share information, not secure
totally.
information. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Like the whole idea of network security is a bit oxymoronic
it
because
is.
networks deliver packets. And when you start thinking about security, you're asking, for example, if you want to peek inside of packets and try to figure out whether they're supposed to be there or not, that's a really hard problem. And the root of that problem is that we start with openness. So by virtualizing the networking, we can start with a closed system, a fail closed lock, and then only open it when we have the right reasons for doing that, which is this particular identity, which is an ID card, a verifiable identity, is actually allowed to connect to that thing.
Yeah,
So
and
it
that's
allows us to solve the right problems and discipline our systems to start closed and only open when they're supposed to.
yeah, and that's for me that's a really big difference. Like when personally think about a VPN versus a zero trust overlay, I have that same reaction, but my brain actually went in a little different place because a VPN to me means I can access all of the things that are private to me versus a zero trust overlay, allowing me only to access the things that I can access, which is exactly what you're saying, right? Start
Yeah,
with no access, but my brain is one step further already, saying, yeah, I know it's zero trust, just implies no access, but it's maybe not so obvious that zero trust really says
right.
start out with nobody can access anything anywhere. You have to go through the process of actually authorizing them in order for them to access whatever they're trying to get at,
Yeah.
which is a good way to think about it.
And
Now,
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say now, firewalls can do that in some way, right? Like
Sure.
firewalls themselves are generally able to control who accesses what. So when I think of a VPN, is there a centralized firewall in the same way that lets me say micro segment the VPN? I don't even know enough about VPNs to know if that is a capability that many of them have.
Yeah, in my experience with a few different VPNs and firewalls, it is certainly possible to start with a closed system and only allow known network flows, generally described as a tuple of source, destination, protocol, possibly also application. But you centralize the management of that with a VPN or a firewall. That is, you have some expert, someone who has the administrator privileges on that system that needs to be able to describe those network flows, and there's a certain rigidity to that. So we're not talking about identities, we're talking about network flows,
And I
right?
was
Which are
actually going to
IP
ask that. Yeah,
addresses.
I was going to ask that question next. Is what is the information which is being used then to decide access? I
Right.
would imagine that it's going to end up being your IP address at that point, right? The source IP.
It's going to be a tuple of source IP, destination IP, and by IP I mean some value that's described as a classless interdomain routing kind of IP address prefix
and
combo.
and so like so it's not a strong identity, which is
Right.
another
It's an
key.
IP address,
It's another key tenet of
not
a
a
zero
person.
trust overlay. And so like when I experience this, generally it is almost certainly because I am trying to SSH to something in the cloud which has a ACL access control list that says, hey, this single IP address is permitted to access that to SSH to wherever I'm getting to, right? Like I forget to go to say Amazon and update my security group routinely. I'll pick up my laptop and go to the dentist or whatever, and then be confused as to why why I wasn't able to access what I was trying to access because of that firewall. So I imagine a zero trust overlay is better in that regard because using the identity as that tuple, if you would, or source is
Hmm.
superior. It lets me it decouples the actual underlay from my overlay in that way.
Yeah, decoupling is a good way to, or abstraction. It allows you to provide a super highway where the rules are different on top of all that. But I led with you could accomplish this through Herculean efforts if you're lucky enough to be building from scratch with a VPN and a firewall. The problem is that most, in practice, in reality, most environments started with a simple rule set like you have to be on the VPN in order to be in the network, in order to be able to access all the private stuff.
Yeah.
And so they have this problem. Most people, most environments using, like in practice, in reality, using VPNs have this problem where every device that is on the VPN is in the private network. And so that system, you could say, hasn't been disciplined to be closed by default. That
Yeah.
system has this basic assumption that if you're inside the castle, you're allowed to play with all the fun toys.
Yeah, and that's always been my experience too. That was actually why I was, because I don't purport to know everything. There might be products out there that have mm, features I'm not aware of, but in my experience, every time I'm on a VPN, just getting on the VPN is enough.
Yep.
Like that is sufficient. That is the access into the castle. Yeah. Um, so that's one core tenet of a zero trust overlay versus a VPN. What would be the next thing that comes to mind? Is there a next thing?
After turning it upside down so that we are a closed system by default, I think the just zero trust overlays in general, um, probably the next most visible characteristic there in terms of, we could think about this in terms of superpowers. I think the strong identity gives you attribution of activity, whereas because IP addresses are not identities, one can inspect the traffic. One can observe the traffic that's happening on a normal IP network and try to infer not only whether that traffic is supposed to be there, but what is happening.
Right.
Through deep
So
packet inspection, looking at the port numbers on the
yeah.
packets, you can jump to conclusions about what's going on there. But
Right.
all of this has the same problem as trying to attribute an identity to an IP address. Yes, your VPN might say this particular user currently has this particular IP address, and that is authoritative to a point, but it is still not a cryptographic assurance.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it is still very possible to defeat that assurance, to
Right.
to invalidate that assurance,
Right.
to break that, association
Yeah, for
through IP
me,
stripping.
I like the way you're approaching it with the inverting of the thought paradigm, right? Like to me, I get on the VPN and then I take away privileges through the firewall, rules as necessary. I start adding them to deny as opposed to starting with deny and adding acceptance criteria, like for me, the next one is you would refer to the tuple as to the application, the source, the destination, and then maybe the application.
Protocol. Yeah.
Yeah. um, so, like, for me, being able to only expose my web server, which whatever port that might be on, I think is the next thing that I think about having that fine grained control right out of the gate. I think is probably the next thing that comes to my mind. But you mentioned the superpowers, which we've done a whole video series on. What's your favorite one?
Well, I think the portability is the most unsung. I want to bring attention to the portability
Mm,
superpower
yeah. I
because
don't think we have that superpower, do we? Do we have,
I don't
or
know
do
that
we?
we've talked about it
I
enough.
don't think we do.
Yeah, I want to bring more attention to this idea that as a developer, I can I can enjoy deploying my application onto an overlay and simply and have a simplified relationship with the the hard network infrastructure. That is, I don't need to rely upon perfect alignment between the needs of my application and the configuration of the firewall or the VPN. The portability superpower could be summarized as just deploy it anywhere and simply not care about that perfect alignment.
Yeah. See, I was thinking of multi-cloud is when you brought that up.
Yeah, anywhere.
ZD is right, right, but uh, anywhere to me doesn't evoke the same idea as the portability that you were hitting at. So, like my favorite portability example is the one where I picked up my computer and
Just move.
I went to the dentist
Right.
and I was using ZSSH and I was still connected through
Just
ZSSH
works. Yeah.
because yeah, and I didn't have to update that ACL in Amazon. It just worked. That was a great moment for me personally, where I was like, wow, that was really cool. That's the real portability. And then back to the allowing of firewall rules that we were talking about. Oftentimes, your source IP, if you are at a corporate destination, you are allowing anything in that network because generally speaking, you'll have the same exit IP. If you were to whitelist that IP, you're allowing everybody in that network to at least get through that spot in the firewall. So if you had an office with 5,000 people and you needed to SSH to your server, you've got no choice. You have to allow everybody who exits your corporate network from that IP address to at least be able to SSH to your machine. And if you're in some place like, the Holiday Inn or something along those lines, then you've opened that door to everybody who might be there too, which is not so great. You don't have to do that sort of thing with a zero trust
Right.
overlay, which is pretty amazing. But I like that. I like the portability aspect. Not a lot of people think about. And that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, building with a zero trust overlay allows you to build differently. For example, if I'm developing an application and I want to focus on getting it working before I reveal it to the world, before I expose it to the public internet, then I might cut some corners. I might wait longer to think about TLS or passwords, things like that. Think about hardening, think about penetration testing of the API. Whereas with a zero trust overlay, my application doesn't ever need to be public
Well, you're
in
actually
order to
hitting on
in order to be useful.
yeah, you're actually hitting on the thing I've been thinking about for now 15 minutes that we've been talking about because we just started with the whole VPN versus zero trust overlay, which is germane to self hosters because if you're going to self host, you're going to want some way of accessing your private space. But one of the things that makes OpenZD, quite different, even from lots of zero trust overlays, is that ability that you're kind of hitting on there of being able to embed zero trust principles into your application itself and letting your application be portable or your application have that strong identity and all this sort of stuff that you're kind of touching on now. So that's like I specifically left OpenZD out of this mix because just on the self-hosted forums, a lot of times it's just why is this better than a VPN? So I thought maybe we just talk zero trust overlay. But
Yeah,
if you're a developer and you're trying to create secure connectivity, as a developer myself, I don't think there's a better and easier way to accomplish it than to use an OpenZD overlay. Like it is once you get used to it, it is just easy, So it's a pretty powerful feature, specifically of the OpenZD zero trust overlay.
Yeah, and the situation advances more gracefully when you start with a zero trust overlay. Um, Now, we have imagined ways for people to bridge over from a VPN use case to a zero trust use case. We have tunnelers, we have gateways, and things like that to allow both to exist harmoniously during a transitional period. But back to that developer perspective, starting with a zero trust overlay allows you to really focus on the right problems, allows you to really focus on the so there are all these additional considerations you don't have to concern yourself with,
Like what?
like layers of internet edge, a web application firewall, um,
Now
to some extent
the
load balancing. Yeah.
contrarians among us would ask, I am used to dealing with those things. I like the sorts of features that they provide.
Mhm.
Does OpenZD solve the same problems? You specifically mentioned the web application firewall, which is, I think, a use case OpenZD is not looking to solve. Right?
Right,
You could build, and we would encourage you to build a web application firewall that is OpenZD aware. But a web application firewall usually will be doing that deep packet inspection that you were talking about earlier,
right.
looking for exfiltration that doesn't deserve to be there. It's that observability that
Or
is
drawing conclusions about the requester, the entity sending the request, like which geo region is it from, and do I want to allow those geo regions.
sure, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I mean that's a little bit about Open ZD or a zero trust overlay versus a VPN. Is there anything? Does the chat? I see we have a few viewers. Look at that. Does
Hello.
chat have anything that they want to toss out? Did we miss something that's fantastic? Uh,
Yeah, just
or
throw it into the chat if you want to talk about it.
or if you are watching this not on the chat and on the live stream replay, go to discourse. Can I put up the discourse? Let's see. Let's see what. Hey, look at me. You can be a producer. Go to discourse. Start a discussion. Let me know or let us know what it is that we might have missed about a zero trust overlay versus a VPN that we might not have talked about. I think it's you know like this topic isn't exactly um, glamorous, right? uh, Oftentimes, security is one of those things that people don't want to think about. So, perhaps you have something that we didn't cover, and usually. Right now, I think that's mostly just for brevity, right? Like we could probably blow V8 on and on here for a while, but we're already at 11:30, so maybe we shouldn't. If you're not having as much fun as this as me and Ken are, then maybe we should move along to maybe the next topic because I think it is relevant as well, which is user experience. Oh, I didn't. Did I make it? Did I make it? Yes. Psh, user
User
experience.
experience,
Yeah.
UX.
So I wanted to bring this one up because Ken and I we're working on a developer experience team, and we're trying to make the the overall experience for all users better. So not just developers, but ZD does really focus on application embedded zero trust. So developer focus is where we're always going to come from for starters. That's why we have all these SDKs that you can go out and try. But like Ken said, it's going to be a journey, and there's going to be lots of applications that you cannot or don't want to invest in adding ZD into. So there's always going to be this brownfield component to any OpenZD
For
overlay. But
sure.
this is one of those things that is a great, this. If I were to put on the list of things we didn't talk about OpenZD versus or a zero trust overlay versus VPN is OpenZD gives you that bridge. So um, if you choose OpenZD, you'll have a zero trust overlay network, which you can then base your own applications on. So that's probably a pretty powerful thing that you can't get from just any zero trust overlay. So I'll kick that in there. But along with a zero trust overlay does come I think, with a bit of complexity and a bit of cognitive overhead that I think is a difficult thing for all zero trust overlays to really shine through. Usually when I'm out on these self-hosted forums trying to let people know there's a better alternative. Well, I think it's better. There's an alternative to just opening a port in your firewall, which I think we can all agree is not a great idea. Even though it is done routinely, across the internet, doesn't mean it has to be that way, right? But this whole concept of experience is important to me. I personally want to make things so easy that there is very little, if any, pushback to using it. But I've seen a lot of people say starting with a zero trust overlay is kind of complicated.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that, Ken?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the cognitive load statement that you have to be somewhat familiar with the problems that it's solving before you really appreciate the price that you're paying, or
Yeah.
before you really appreciate the work that's been done to simplify this. I think it's super clear to me that this is a net benefit for the developer and for the security practitioner, the DevOps practitioner. Every single problem set is vastly simplified, and the net effect is a simplification. But there are these. But first, you have to take what appears to be a harder road at first.
You mean you have to recognize that the pain that you're going to pay will be worth it in the long run. Is that what you're
Right. It's
saying?
like it's like front loading the so if this app is eventually going to if my app is eventually going to be widely used, then I'm going to have scale problems. But if I start thinking about those scale problems earlier because I have battle scars from previous scale problems, I'm more likely to front load, pay that price of admission for the scaling problems by starting to think about scale a little bit earlier.
So
And you could say
when
the same thing for an overlay.
yeah, yeah, I was about to say when I think about the pushback that I've seen on adopting OpenZD, generally speaking, it's because the deny by default forces you to learn a few things that you're not already familiar with, right? Right now, if I were to set up my own VPN, or if I were to use something like WireGuard, which is definitely a better VPN, then I can do it a bit easier. It's a bit less load on me because I just need to know the IP address and I can feed it to WireGuard and WireGuard will say, okay, this guy can talk to that guy, and we're done, right? Like that is the extent of that security model. There's no fine grained control over the port, for example, that you can or cannot access. There's no easy way of assigning multiple users to that that overlay, at least that I know of, the VPN or the WireGuard. There are things out there like Tailscale and Headscale and stuff like that that I might not know about. There's supposedly NetMaker is another one that I'll try to make that process easier. But OpenZD already does all of those things as well. So the feedback I often get is that it's just too difficult. Is there something that we could do differently that would, or actually, let's all put this back to the community. I'd like to know that one too. Go back to discourse again. Poof, here we go. Discourse. Let us know. What was confusing, what could be better. I think we all realize that we're still missing some documentation. So there's no question that more doc would be helpful. We are a relatively small team of people still cranking out features, still supporting customers, as well as trying to write the documentation. So we are getting there, and we're doing an okay job at that. We could always do better. I think it's always the case. But if there's something specifically that we're missing, I would love to know that one too.
or just to know where someone stumbled precisely.
Yeah.
Like I came in with this a story like let us know if you came in blazing and interested and that interest petered out at some point. What was it that proved more difficult, more challenging than you would have liked?
Yeah, because everybody has a threshold, right? Like I'm going to
Sure.
spend this much of my time doing this, and if I spent this much, and I don't feel like I was almost there, then I'm going to just throw it all away. If you found that, if you had that situation, definitely would like to know that one too. That's the sort of stuff that we aspire to make it as easy to use as anything. It's going to be simple. It's going to be straightforward. But it does take a little bit of learning. I did see not too long ago, Ken. I don't know if you saw it too, but somebody posted on Reddit a take on the children's book. I think from Kubernetes. You ever seen the Kubernetes
Oh
illustrated
yes.
children's book? Yeah, might be a Docker one too. I was trying to do a little research onto, who came up with the technical jargon explained as children's book because it's a good way to go about it. Anyway, it was recently on Reddit around zero trust and all that sort of stuff. Where am I going with this? The children's book has derailed me. I was thinking of I'd like to know. Yeah, I don't even know where I am anymore. What was I saying? I was saying about how easy it was to use. Derailed. Oh man, this just went off the rails too.
Well, if we zoom out and frame the whole discussion, I what I was picking up is that user experience is an umbrella term that includes developer experience. Developer experience is still quite broad and is adjunct to things like developer relations and advocacy. All of these are interrelated but distinct foci. And but user experience means that we care about the whole end-to-end experience, whether you are using a graphical interface, a CLI, or if you're in the IDE.
Yeah.
Still, it's encompassed by user experience.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up really well there, Ken. On that note, I think that this is a good ZDTV. I would love to hear any feedback. Nothing in the chat so far, Ken, just an FYI.
Okay.
And yeah, go to Discourse. Let me put that back up again. Where's Discourse? Here it is. Start a conversation. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. Praise is always appreciated. Criticism always well taken. So I think that'll be this week's ZDTV.
All right, man.
How you feel about that, Ken? You good?
Feel good.
All right, man. See everybody later.
Bye now.